Hello.
Hey everyone, I never thought I'd be posting something like this, but here I am. My name's Mike, and I'm a 36-year-old guy who's been married to my wife, Laura, for the past 12 years. We have two beautiful kids, Ella and Jake, and up until recently, I thought we had the perfect life. We bought a nice house in the suburbs, shared a lot of the same interests, and even survived the ups and downs that come with any long-term relationship. I really thought we were solid, but lately, things have been off. It started with the little things. Laura, who's always been glued to her phone, became even more obsessed with it, laughing at texts she wouldn't share and spending way too much time out with the girls. She'd always come home a little too happy, but when I asked about her night, she'd just say, "Oh, nothing special, just boring girl talk." She even started dressing up more than usual, wearing outfits that I hadn't seen in years, and taking extra care with her hair and makeup. When I teased her about trying to impress someone, she'd brush it off with a laugh and say, "Can't a girl look good for herself?" It wasn't just her appearance, though. Our conversations became shorter, her patience with me and the kids wore thinner, and she'd snap at the smallest things. At first, I chalked it up to stress. Work had been rough for both of us, and parenting is no joke. But in the back of my mind, a tiny voice kept nagging at me, telling me something was wrong. I tried to ignore it, but the doubts kept creeping in, especially when she started coming home late more often. Always with the same excuse, work ran late, or the girls wanted to grab a drink. I wanted to believe her, I really did. After all, this was Laura, my partner, the woman I'd vowed to spend my life with. But that voice wouldn't shut up, and soon, I started wondering if there was more to these nights out than she was letting on. I hated myself for even thinking it, but I couldn't help it. The woman who used to light up when she saw me now seemed distant, like I was just an afterthought in her life, and then, one night, everything changed. It was a Friday night, and Laura had gone out again, claiming she was meeting her friends for drinks. Normally, I'd stay home with the kids, but something in me snapped that evening. The kids were tucked in bed, and I was alone with my thoughts. That nagging feeling, the one that had been slowly driving me insane, was now a full-blown alarm in my head. I couldn't just sit there and ignore it anymore, so, I did something I never thought I'd do. I went through Laura's things. I felt guilty as hell, but I told myself I just needed some peace of mind. I started with her phone, which she'd carelessly left charging on the kitchen counter. It was locked, of course, but I knew her passcode. She trusted me with everything, or at least I thought she did. As soon as I unlocked it, I was hit with a wave of anxiety. My hands were shaking, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't want to find anything, but at the same time, I needed to know the truth. I went straight to her messages, and that's when I saw it. A text thread with some guy named Chris. My heart dropped as I scrolled through the messages. The texts were full of inside jokes, flirty banter, and plans to meet up. It was obvious this wasn't just some casual friend or coworker, but the worst part. The pictures. There were photos of them together, selfies of Laura smiling like I hadn't seen her smile in years, and Chris with his arm around her like he owned her. There were messages that left no doubt about what had been going on, like "Last night was amazing. Can't wait to see you again and you're all I think about." I felt like I was going to throw up. My entire world crumbled in that moment. This was my wife, the mother of my children, the woman I'd built a life with. And here she was, sneaking around behind my back, living some secret life with this guy. I dropped her phone on the counter and just stood there, staring at nothing. It was like I was in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. I kept thinking, this can't be real. This isn't happening. But it was real, and there was no escaping it. All the little signs I'd ignored, all the excuses I'd accepted, they all made sense now. I'd been such a fool. After the shock of discovering Laura's affair, I was paralyzed with anger, confusion, and disbelief. I couldn't just sit there and stew in my emotions, though. I needed answers. I needed to know why why she would do this to me, to our family. I thought about calling her right then and there, but I knew that wouldn't end well. Instead, I decided to wait until she came home. I wanted to confront her face to face, see her reaction, and hear whatever lame excuse she would try to spin. The minutes felt like hours as I sat on the couch, staring at the front door. My mind was racing, swinging between wanting to scream at her and breaking down in tears. I kept thinking about our kids, what this would mean for them. How they'd cope if we ended up splitting. But every time I thought about forgiving her, those messages and pictures flashed through my mind like a cruel reminder of what she'd done. Finally, around midnight, I heard her car pull into the driveway. My heart was pounding out of my chest as I listened to her footsteps approaching the door. She walked in with that same happy glow she'd had every time she came back from one of her so-called girls' nights. But this time, I could see something different. She was almost too cheerful, like she was trying to cover up whatever guilt she might have been feeling. "Hey, you're still up?" she said with a big smile, setting her purse down on the table. "I thought you'd be in bed by now." I didn't answer right away. I just stared at her, trying to figure out how to start this conversation without losing it completely. But as I opened my mouth, all the anger I'd been holding back just exploded. "Who the hell is Chris?" I spat out, my voice shaking with rage. Laura's smile dropped instantly, and for a split second, she looked genuinely shocked. But then, like a switch had flipped, she went into defensive mode. "What are you talking about?" she snapped, trying to act confused, but I could see the panic in her eyes. "Don't play dumb with me, Laura," I said, standing up and glaring at her. "I saw your messages. I know everything." For a moment, there was just silence between us. I could see her mind racing, trying to figure out how to dig herself out of this one. Then, in typical Laura fashion, she went straight to denial. "Mike, you've got it all wrong," she said, her voice trembling. "Chris is just a friend. Those messages, they're nothing, just joking around. You're blowing this way out of proportion." "Really?" I said, feeling my anger boil over. "Because last night was amazing. Can't wait to see you again doesn't sound like a joke to me. How long has this been going on, Laura? How long have you been lying to me?" She flinched at that, realizing her usual excuses weren't going to work this time. But instead of admitting the truth, she doubled down. "It's not what you think," she insisted, raising her voice. "Chris is just someone I've been hanging out with because I needed a break from all the stress at home. Nothing happened, Mike. You're being paranoid." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Even with the evidence staring her in the face, she was still trying to lie her way out of it. That's when I knew for sure that whatever we had, whatever trust one thought we shared, was gone. She had betrayed me in the worst way possible, and now she didn't even have the decency to own up to it. "Stop lying, Laura," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I'm done playing your games. Just tell me the truth." But Laura just crossed her arms and glared at me, like I was the one who'd wronged her. "You don't know what you're talking about," she hissed. "If you're going to accuse me of something like this, then maybe you're the problem here, not me." After Laura's pitiful attempt to gaslight me, I felt the last bit of hope drain out of me. I thought I might get some kind of explanation, some shred of remorse. But instead, all I got was more lies and her twisted attempt to turn this mess back on me. The woman standing in front of me, the one who was supposed to be my partner, my best friend, was now a stranger who didn't care that she was tearing me apart. I couldn't stand to look at her. I turned away, my mind spinning. The weight of everything I'd discovered crashed down on me like a ton of bricks. The life we'd built together, the future I thought we had, it all felt like one big joke now. And I was the fool who hadn't seen the punchline coming. I went upstairs to our bedroom, needing to get away from her, from the house that now felt like a prison. I could hear Laura behind me, still trying to defend herself, throwing out excuses that were as empty as her promises. "Mike, Please, you're overreacting, she said, following me up the stairs. Can't we just talk about this? It's not what you think. I ignored her and slammed the bedroom door shut. I leaned against it, trying to catch my breath, but all I could feel was a deep, gnawing pain in my chest. I was furious, but beneath that, there was a sadness so profound I didn't know how to handle it. How did we get here? How did the woman I loved more than anything become someone I didn't even recognize? I sat on the edge of the bed, my head in my hands, trying to keep myself together. But it was no use. The tears came, hot and angry, and I didn't try to stop them. I felt humiliated, broken, and completely lost. The life I thought I had was gone, and I had no idea what to do next. Laura must have sensed that her excuses weren't working because she went quiet for a while. I could hear her moving around in the hallway, probably trying to figure out her next move. After a few minutes, she knocked softly on the door. "Mike, please," she said, her voice softer now, trying to sound sincere. "Let's just talk this out. I don't want to lose you over something that didn't even mean anything." Her words cut through me like a knife. Didn't mean anything? How could she say that? How could she look at what she'd done and just brush it off like it was nothing? I wanted to scream at her, to tell her that she'd already lost me the moment she decided to sneak around with another man. But I didn't have the strength to fight anymore. I was too drained, too devastated. Instead, I just sat there, staring at the floor, wondering how I was ever going to move past this. How could I ever trust her again? How could I even look at her without feeling this deep sense of betrayal? The truth was, I didn't know if I could. I didn't know if there was any coming back from this. Eventually, I heard Laura walk away. Her footsteps fading as she went downstairs. I was alone in our bedroom, surrounded by all the reminders of the life we'd built together. But now, it all felt tainted. Everything we'd shared, everything I thought we had, was overshadowed by her betrayal. I sat there for what felt like hours, just trying to process everything. My thoughts were a chaotic mess, swinging from anger to sadness to sheer disbelief. How could she do this to us? To our kids? To me? I knew I couldn't stay in that room forever, but I also knew I wasn't ready to face Laura again. I needed space, time to think, to figure out what the hell I was going to do next. I wasn't sure if I could ever forgive her, let alone stay in this marriage. But the one thing I knew for sure was that things would never be the same again. The next morning, I woke up to the harsh reality of everything that had happened the night before. My eyes were swollen from the tears I'd shed, and my body felt heavy, like I was carrying the weight of the world on my shoulders. I didn't sleep much. How could I, knowing that the person I loved most had betrayed me so deeply? I stared at the ceiling, my mind numb, until I heard the sounds of the kids waking up. I pulled myself out of bed, trying to muster the strength to face the day. Ella and Jake didn't deserve to see their dad falling apart, and they definitely didn't need to know what was going on between their mom and me. At least, not yet. I didn't have a plan, but I knew I needed to keep it together for their sake. When I finally made my way downstairs, I found Laura in the kitchen, acting like everything was normal. She was making breakfast for the kids, her face carefully composed, but I could see the tension in her eyes when she glanced at me. It was clear she was walking on eggshells, probably hoping I'd just drop the whole thing and pretend nothing had happened. But there was no way I was letting her off that easily. "Morning, Dad," Ella said cheerfully, running up to give me a hug. I forced a smile, hugging her back, trying to keep my voice steady. "Morning, sweetie," I said, ruffling her hair. Jake was already at the table, munching on his cereal, oblivious to the storm brewing between his parents. Laura tried to act casual, but I could see her watching me closely, waiting to see what I'd do. I wasn't sure how I'd get through the day without losing it, but one thing was clear, I couldn't just let this slide. If she thought she could cheat on me and get away with it, she had another thing coming. After breakfast, I told Laura I needed to go out for a bit. She looked nervous, but didn't say anything, just nodded as I grabbed my keys and headed for the door. I needed to clear my head, to figure out my next move. I drove around aimlessly for a while, trying to calm the rage boiling inside me. Part of me wanted to confront Chris, to make him pay for wrecking my marriage, but I knew that wouldn't solve anything. Instead, I found myself parked in a quiet spot near the park where I used to take the kids when they were little. I sat there, thinking about everything that had happened, trying to make sense of it all. That's when it hit me, I wasn't just hurt, I was furious. Furious at Laura for lying to me, for treating our marriage like it was nothing. And if she wanted to play dirty, I could play dirty too. A plan started forming in my mind. If Laura thought she could keep up this charade, I'd show her just how wrong she was. I wasn't going to sit back and let her think she'd gotten away with this. She needed to understand the consequences of her actions, to see that her betrayal had real, tangible costs. That night, after the kids were in bed, I put my plan into action. I knew she had another one of her girls' nights planned for the next day, at least, that's what she called it. But I knew better now. So, I decided to beat her at her own game. The next evening, as soon as she left the house, I packed a few bags for the kids and myself. I didn't say anything to them, just told them we were going on a little adventure, and they were thrilled. We drove to my parents' place a couple of towns over. I hadn't told them what was going on, but when we got there, I just said I needed a few days, and they didn't ask any questions. They could see something was wrong, but they knew better than to push me. Then, I sent Laura a message she'd never forget. "We're not at home. Enjoy your night, Laura. You won't find us waiting for you when you get back." I knew she'd be shocked when she came home to an empty house, expecting everything to be business as usual. I could only imagine her reaction, walking through the door, finding the place dark and empty, realizing she was all alone. I wasn't there to see it, but just the thought of it brought me some satisfaction. That was just the beginning of my revenge. It wasn't about getting even, it was about showing her that I wasn't some clueless, naive husband she could walk all over. If she wanted to act like our marriage didn't matter, then I'd make sure she felt the consequences of her betrayal in ways she never expected. This was just the start of reclaiming my dignity and my life. If Laura thought she could just sweep her affair under the rug, she was about to learn that I wasn't someone to be trifled with. The power had shifted, and it was about time she realized it. After sending that message to Laura, I felt a strange sense of calm. It wasn't peace, far from it, but more like the calm before a storm. I knew she'd be furious, panicked even, when she came home to an empty house. Part of me hoped it would shake her to her core, make her realize just how badly she'd screwed up. But the other part of me was ready for the inevitable, more lies, more manipulation, more of her trying to twist everything around to make me look like the bad guy. I stayed at my parents' place that night, lying awake in the guest room, with Ella and Jake sleeping peacefully beside me. My phone buzzed over and over with texts and calls from Laura, but I ignored them all. I wasn't ready to talk to her, to listen to whatever story she'd cooked up to explain away her actions. The next morning, after getting the kids ready, I finally decided to check my phone. As expected, there were a dozen missed calls and a barrage of frantic texts. "Mike, where are you? Why did you take the kids? We need to talk. Please, Mike, just come home so we can sort this out. You're being unreasonable. This isn't fair to the kids." Each message was more desperate than the last, but none of them showed any real remorse. She was still trying to control the narrative, still trying to make it seem like I was overreacting. It was typical Laura, always needing to be in control, always refusing to take responsibility for her actions. By midday, I decided it was time to respond. I wasn't going to let her think she could guilt me into coming back without facing the truth of what she'd done. "We'll be staying with my parents for a few days," I texted back. "You need to think about what you've done and how you're going to make this right. Don't bother calling until you're ready to be honest, Laura. No more lies." I could almost hear her seething on the other end of the phone. But I didn't care. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I had the upper hand. I wasn't going to be the one bending over backward to fix things this time. She was the one who broke our marriage, and she was the one who needed to figure out how to mend it, if that was even possible. Later that afternoon, when the kids were busy playing with their grandparents, I finally decided to pick up one of her calls. The moment I answered, Laura's voice came through, tense and full of frustration. "Mike, you can't just take the kids and disappear like that. Do you have any idea how worried I've been?" I took a deep breath, keeping my voice as steady as I could. "You didn't seem too worried last night when you were out with Chris," I said coldly. "I told you, Laura, no more lies. If you want to talk, you're going to have to come clean. All of it." There was a pause, and I could hear her struggling to maintain her composure. "Mike, I've already told you, nothing happened. You're making this into something it's not. Stop it, Laura." I snapped, my patience finally wearing thin. "I saw the texts, I saw the pictures. You can't gaslight your way out of this. How long has this been going on? How many times did you look me in the eyes and lie straight to my face?" Her silence told me everything I needed to know. Finally, she let out a shaky breath and said, "I don't know what you want me to say. Yes, I've been seeing Chris, but it's not what you think. It just happened. It just happened." I echoed, my voice thick with disbelief. "You don't just happen to start an affair, Laura. You made a choice, over and over again. And now you're trying to minimize it like it's no big deal." She started to cry then, but it didn't move me. I'd seen those tears before, and I wasn't going to let them manipulate me this time. "I was lonely, Mike," she said through her sobs. "I felt like we were drifting apart, and Chris was just there. I never wanted to hurt you. I never meant for it to go this far." "Drifting apart?" I repeated, feeling a mix of anger and sadness swell up inside me. "We've had rough patches before, Laura, but we always worked through them together. Why didn't you talk to me? Why didn't you try to fix things with me, instead of running to some other guy?" Her crying intensified, but I felt more numb than anything. This was the cold realization I'd been dreading, that she didn't value our marriage enough to fight for it. Instead, she chose the easy way out, the selfish way out. "I'm sorry, Mike," she whispered. "I really am. I don't know what to do now." I took a long pause, letting her words sink in. The truth was, I didn't know what to do either. The damage was done. And there was no way to undo it. I had to make a choice, either find a way to forgive her and try to rebuild what she'd destroyed, or walk away and start over on my own. "Figure it out, Laura," I said finally, my voice cold and detached. "Because I'm not going to make this easy for you. If you want to save our marriage, you're going to have to earn back my trust. And that's not going to happen overnight." With that, I hung up the phone, feeling a strange mix of satisfaction and emptiness. I'd finally forced her to confront the reality of what she'd done, but it didn't make the pain go away. If anything, it just made it more real. Now, I was left with the daunting task of figuring out what I wanted. And whether or not I could ever forgive her for betraying me in the worst way possible. The days that followed were some of the hardest I've ever had to endure. I stayed at my parents' house with the kids, trying to maintain a sense of normalcy for their sake. They were too young to understand what was happening, and I did everything I could to shield them from the turmoil between their mother and me. I tried to focus on them, tried to be the best dad I could be, but inside, I was still a mess. Laura kept trying to reach out, sending long texts, leaving tearful voicemails, begging me to come home so we could talk things out. I could tell she was scared of losing me, scared of what people might think if they found out about the affair, scared of facing the reality of what she'd done. But her fear didn't move me. I needed time, space, and most of all, I needed her to realize that she couldn't just cry and apologize her way out of this. One night, a week after I'd left, Laura showed up at my parents' house unannounced. My mom answered the door and, to my surprise, let her in. I was in the living room, playing a board game with Ella and Jake, when Laura walked in. She looked tired, like she hadn't slept in days, her eyes red from crying. The kids jumped up, excited to see her, and I watched as she hugged them tightly, her tears starting up again. "Mommy, why are you crying?" Ella asked, her little face full of concern. Laura forced a smile, trying to hold it together. "I'm just so happy to see you, sweetheart," she said, her voice shaky. I didn't say anything, just watched as she interacted with the kids, trying to pretend everything was fine. My parents, sensing the tension, took the kids upstairs to give us some privacy. Once we were alone, Laura turned to me, her expression a mix of desperation and determination. "Mike, please," she started, her voice pleading. "We need to talk. I can't stand this. I miss you. I miss us." I crossed my arms, leaning against the wall. "You should have thought about that before you started sneaking around with Chris." I replied coldly. "What do you want from me, Laura? You want me to just forget everything? Pretend like you didn't tear our family apart?" She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "No, I don't expect you to just forgive me like that. I know I messed up. I know I hurt you, and I'll regret it for the rest of my life. But I love you, Mike. I want to fix this. I want to fix us." I felt a pang in my chest, a small part of me wanting to believe her, to believe that we could somehow find a way back to each other. But the pain of her betrayal was still too fresh, too raw. "How?" I asked, my voice low. "How do you expect us to fix this, Laura? Do you even understand what you've done?" She nodded, biting her lip, trying to keep her composure. "I've been seeing a therapist," she said quietly. "I know that doesn't fix anything, but I'm trying to understand why I did what I did. I'm trying to become a better person, a better wife. I'm willing to do whatever it takes, Mike. Couples counseling, therapy, whatever you want. I'll do it." Her words hung in the air between us. Part of me wanted to lash out, to tell her it was too little, too late. But another part of me, the part that still loved her despite everything, wanted to give her a chance. After all, we had years of history together, a family, a life that I wasn't ready to throw away just yet. "I don't know if I can ever trust you again, Laura," I said finally, my voice breaking. "You broke something in me. Something I don't know if I can ever repair." She took a step closer, her eyes searching mine. "I know, and I'm so sorry," she whispered. "But I'm asking you to let me try. Please, Mike, don't give up on us. Don't give up on our family." I stood there, torn between my anger and the love I still felt for her. I thought about the kids, about what it would mean for them if we couldn't work this out. I thought about all the memories we'd shared, all the dreams we'd had together. But most of all, I thought about whether I could ever look at Laura the same way again. "I can't make any promises," I said after a long silence. "But I'll come back home. For the kids. And we'll see where it goes from there." The relief on Laura's face was palpable. And she nodded quickly, wiping her tears. "Thank you, Mike. That's all I'm asking for. A chance." I wasn't sure if I was making the right decision, but I knew I had to try, for the kids, and for the part of me that still hoped we could somehow salvage what we once had. But as I packed up our things and prepared to return to the home that no longer felt like a sanctuary, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of a long, difficult road ahead. And deep down, I wondered if it would ever truly be enough. Moving back home felt like stepping into a battlefield. The house, once filled with warmth and love, now felt cold and haunted by the betrayal that had taken place within its walls. The kids were thrilled to be back, blissfully unaware of the tension between their parents. But for Laura and me, every room, every piece of furniture, every little detail felt like a reminder of what we'd lost. Laura tried her best to make things feel normal. She cooked dinner every night, helped the kids with their homework, and tried to engage me in conversation like we were just another happy family. But I could see the strain in her eyes, the way she flinched whenever I responded to her with cold indifference. She was walking on eggshells, afraid that one wrong move would send everything crashing down again. I wasn't trying to be cruel, but I couldn't help the way I felt. Every time I looked at her, all I could see were those texts, those pictures of her and Chris. The trust that had once been the foundation of our relationship was shattered, and I had no idea how to rebuild it. We started seeing a couples therapist, just like Laura had suggested. I wasn't sure if it would help, but I figured it was worth a shot. The therapist was a calm, understanding woman who didn't take sides but instead guided us through our emotions, trying to help us communicate better. In those sessions, Laura opened up about her feelings of loneliness, her fear that we were drifting apart, and how she had convinced herself that the affair was a way to fill the void. "I know it sounds like an excuse," she said during one session, tears streaming down her face. "But I felt like I was losing you, Mike. We weren't connecting the way we used to, and I was scared. I'm not trying to justify what I did. But that's how I felt." Hearing her say that hurt more than I expected. I knew we'd been having problems, but I never realized how deep they ran. I'd been so focused on providing for the family, on making sure the kids were happy, that I hadn't noticed how far apart Laura and I had drifted. But that didn't change the fact that she betrayed me in the worst way possible. "I get that you were lonely," I replied, my voice tight with anger and pain. "But instead of talking to me, instead of trying to fix things, you turned to someone else. How am I supposed to forgive that?" Laura looked down, unable to meet my gaze. "I don't know," she whispered. I wish I could take it all back. I hate myself for what I did." The therapist stepped in, reminding us that forgiveness and trust wouldn't come overnight. It would take time, effort, and a willingness to rebuild what had been broken. She encouraged us to be patient with each other, to communicate openly, and to take things one step at a time. At home, though, it was easier said than done. We had good days and bad days. Some mornings, I'd wake up and think maybe we could make it work. Maybe, with enough time, I could learn to trust her again. But then something small, a memory, a phrase, even a certain look, would trigger the anger and hurt all over again. One evening, after putting the kids to bed, Laura and I sat in the living room in silence. The air was thick with tension, and I could feel her watching me, waiting for me to say something, anything. Finally, she broke the silence. "Mike," she began cautiously, "I know things are still really hard between us, but I want you to know that I'm committed to making this work. I'm willing to do whatever it takes." I looked at her, trying to see the woman I'd fallen in love with all those years ago. She looked worn, fragile, like she was barely holding it together. And I realized, in that moment, that she was just as scared as I was, scared of what the future held, scared of losing everything we'd built together. "I'm trying, Laura," I said, my voice softer than it had been in weeks. "But it's going to take time. A lot of time. I don't know if I can ever forget what you did, but for the sake of our kids and the life we've built, I'm willing to try." Her eyes filled with tears, and she nodded, reaching out to take my hand. I let her, feeling the warmth of her touch, but it didn't bring the comfort it once did. There was still a barrier between us, a wall of distrust and pain that wouldn't come down easily. From that night on, we tried to make small steps toward healing. We spent more time together as a family, went on dates, and tried to reconnect in ways that had once been second nature. But no matter how hard we tried, there was always an undercurrent of tension, a lingering doubt that kept me from fully letting my guard down. The struggle to rebuild wasn't just about forgiveness, it was about finding a new normal, one that didn't ignore the past but somehow managed to move beyond it. I knew it wouldn't be easy, and there were days when I wondered if it was even worth it. But for now, I was still in it, still trying, still hoping that, maybe, we could find a way to pick up the pieces and start over. But deep down, I couldn't shake the fear that the cracks in our marriage were too deep, that no matter how much we tried to repair them, we'd never be the same again. Months passed, and life settled into a new, uneasy routine. Laura and I continued with therapy, and on the surface, things seemed to be improving. We went through the motions of a normal life, family dinners, helping the kids with their school projects, weekend outings. But beneath it all, there was a tension that never fully went away. It was like we were living in a house built on a cracked foundation, and I couldn't stop wondering when the whole thing would come crashing down. Our therapist kept telling us that healing takes time, that setbacks were normal, and that we needed to be patient with each other. I tried to take her advice to heart, but it wasn't easy. Some days, I felt like we were making progress. I'd catch myself laughing with Laura over something silly, or we'd share a quiet moment that reminded me of the good times we used to have. But other days, the doubts and anger would resurface, and I'd find myself pulling away, unsure if I could ever truly forgive her. One evening, after the kids were in bed, Laura and I sat outside on the porch, watching the sun set. It was one of those rare, peaceful moments where the world seemed to slow down, and for a little while, everything felt almost normal. Laura leaned back in her chair, taking a deep breath before speaking. "Mike, I know we've been through hell these past few months," she began, her voice steady but soft. "And I know I'm the one who put us here. But I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." I tensed, bracing myself for whatever was coming. "What is it?" I asked, my voice cautious. She turned to look at me, her eyes full of the vulnerability she'd been showing more and more lately. "Do you think we can ever really get past this? Do you think we can be happy again?" Her question hung in the air, heavy with the weight of everything we'd been through. I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the woman I'd fallen in love with all those years ago. But I also saw the woman who had betrayed me. The woman who had shattered my trust and my heart. Could I really move past that? Could we rebuild something strong enough to last, or were we just delaying the inevitable? "I don't know," I said finally, my voice thick with emotion. "I want to believe that we can. I want to believe that we can find a way to be happy again, for the kids, for us. But the truth is, I don't know if I'll ever be able to forget what happened. Every time I look at you, I still see him. I see the lies, the betrayal. And I don't know if that will ever go away." She nodded, tears filling her eyes, but she didn't look away. "I understand," she whispered. "And I know I can't change what I did, no matter how much I wish I could. But I want you to know that I'm committed to trying, Mike. I'm committed to doing whatever it takes to make this work, if you're willing to keep trying too." I felt a lump rise in my throat as I listened to her. Part of me wanted to say yes, to keep fighting, to hold on to the hope that we could somehow rebuild what we'd lost. But another part of me, the part that was still raw with pain, wondered if it was even possible. Could I really live the rest of my life with this shadow hanging over us? Could I ever look at Laura without that nagging doubt in the back of my mind? "I'm willing to keep trying," I said slowly, "but I need to be honest with you too, Laura. I don't know how long I can keep doing this if things don't change. I don't want to spend the rest of my life wondering if I'm making a mistake, if I'm holding on to something that's already gone." Her face crumpled, and she reached out to take my hand, her grip firm but trembling. "I don't want to lose you, Mike," she said, her voice breaking. "I don't want to lose our family. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right, I promise." I squeezed her hand, feeling the warmth of her touch, but also the cold uncertainty that had settled in my heart. "I know you mean that, Laura," I said softly. "But promises aren't enough. We both have to want this. We both have to believe that we can get through this, or it's never going to work." We sat there in silence for a long time, the sun dipping below the horizon, leaving us in the dim twilight. I knew we were at a crossroads, either we'd find a way to move forward together, or we'd have to face the possibility that our marriage was beyond repair. As the darkness settled around us, I realized something important: I wasn't ready to give up just yet. I wasn't ready to throw away the life we'd built. The memories we'd shared, the love we'd once had. But I also knew that if we were going to make this work, it would take more than just time and effort. It would take a fundamental shift in how we saw each other, in how we trusted each other. And that wasn't something that could happen overnight, I guess we'll just have to see where this takes us, I said finally, my voice quiet but resolute. One step at a time, Laura. That's all we can do. She nodded, a small, hopeful smile breaking through her tears. One step at a time, she echoed, as we sat there together, holding hands in the growing darkness. I felt a flicker of something I hadn't felt in a long time, hope. It was fragile, tentative, and uncertain, but it was there. Maybe, just maybe, we could find our way back to each other. Or maybe we'd discover that we were too different, too broken to ever be whole again, but for now, I was willing to take that risk. To take that first step and see where it led us. Whether it was the beginning of a new chapter or the end of our story, only time would tell. But at least, for now, we were still in it together. And that, in itself, was something worth holding on to.
Bye-bye.